Chapter 1. The Richest Man Who Ever Lived. Search the internet for the richest person in history, and one name keeps surfacing above pharaohs, oil barons, and tech billionaires: Mansa Musa, ruler of the West African Empire of Mali some 700 years ago. It is a dramatic claim, and an impossible one to prove. No medieval treasury kept the records we would need, and the gold of the 1300s cannot be tidily converted into modern dollars. Yet the legend grew for good reason. When Musa left his homeland in 1324 to make the pilgrimage to Mecca, he traveled with so much gold and gave away so much of it that the story was still being retold in Cairo, in Arabia, and in Europe for centuries. This is the story behind the headline: a real emperor, a real empire, and a journey that placed West Africa firmly on the map of the wider world. Chapter 2. A World You Were Never Taught. Many of us grew up with a map of the medieval world that simply stopped at the edge of the Sahara, as if history below it had not yet begun. The truth is the reverse. While Europe moved through its Middle Ages, West Africa was home to large, organized and wealthy states, with cities, courts, scholars, and trade that reached across a continent. The greatest of them in Musa's day was Mali. It spread across a territory larger than Western Europe, governing a rich patchwork of peoples and towns along the great bend of the River Niger. Its rulers were Muslim, its merchants plugged into a network that ran to the Mediterranean, and its wealth was the envy of distant kingdoms. To understand Mansa Musa, we first set aside the myth of an empty Africa and meet the confident world that produced him. Chapter 3. The Empire of Mali. Mali was not a single city, but a sprawling empire, knitted together by the River Niger, and by the authority of its ruler, whose title, Mansa, meant something close to emperor, or king of kings. At its heart lay the Mande homeland and the royal city of Niani. At its edges lay the trading towns of the desert's southern shore and the gold-bearing lands to the south. Power flowed from control of trade. Every load of goods that crossed Mali's territory could be taxed, and the empire sat astride the busiest routes in the region. Governors held the provinces. A court of officials, judges and scholars, surrounded the Mansa. Travelers, who later visited, remarked on the safety of the roads and the order of the realm. This was the machine of wealth and government that Mansa Musa would inherit and then display to the world. Chapter 4. Gold Beyond Counting. Where did the legendary wealth come from? Not from the desert, but from the well-watered lands to the south, where some of the richest goldfields in the medieval world lay along the rivers of Bambuk. Bure and the country Arab writers called Wangara. Here, gold was won from the earth and the riverbeds and carried north to be traded. So precious was the source that its location was one of the best-kept secrets of the age. Legends grew of a silent trade, in which goods and gold were exchanged between parties who never met. Mali did not own every mine, but it controlled the roads the gold traveled and taxed the trade that moved it. From this came the treasure that filled the Mansa's stores. An empire's gold, though, is not one man's pocket money. Musa commanded the wealth of a state, however the legend later told it. Chapter 5. Salt worth its weight in gold. If gold made Mali famous, salt made it function. In the heat of West Africa, salt was essential to life and scarce in the south, while the Sahara held it in abundance. At desert mines such as Tagaza, slabs of salt were cut straight from the ground, like blocks of stone. Caravans carried these slabs south to be exchanged for gold, and gold north to buy the goods of the Mediterranean world: cloth, copper, books, horses, and glass. In some southern markets, salt traded weight for weight against gold itself. Mali's genius was to sit at the meeting point of these two great currents, north and south, and to keep the peace that let trade flow. Tax on that trade, more than any single mine, was the empire's true fortune. The picture of Mali as a place where gold simply lay about misses the real story. This was a carefully managed engine of commerce. Chapter 6. Heirs of the Lion King. Mansa Musa belonged to the Keita dynasty, and the Keita traced their line to a figure who looms over West African history, Sundiata Keita, the warrior king, remembered as the founder of the Mali Empire in the 13th century. His story, of an exiled prince who returned to defeat a tyrant and unite the Mande peoples, has been kept alive for centuries by the griots, the hereditary historians, poets, and musicians, whose memory served as a living library. It is from this proud tradition that Musa emerged, an inheritor of an empire already established and respected. We do not know every detail of his early life, the records are thin, but we know the world he stepped into, a court steeped in ceremony, lineage, and Islam, where a ruler was expected to be both a worldly power and a defender of the faith. Into that role, around 1312, came Musa. Chapter 7. Mansa Musa takes the throne. Musa came to the throne around the year 1312, becoming one in a line of Mansas who had built Mali into a great power. He told, later, a striking story about how the crown had come to him. His predecessor, he said, had been unwilling to believe that the Atlantic Ocean had no far shore, and had sent out a great fleet to find what lay beyond the water. When a single ship returned with news that the others had been swept away, the ruler fitted out an even larger fleet, took command himself, and sailed west, never to be seen again. Whether the tale is literal history or royal legend, we cannot say. It survives only because Musa repeated it in Egypt. What is certain is that authority passed to Musa, and that he proved an able and ambitious ruler who would soon make his empire's name known across the world. Chapter 8. A King of Faith. Islam had been present in West Africa for generations before Musa, carried south along the trade routes, and adopted by merchants and rulers, while older traditions endured among the wider population. Musa was a devout Muslim, and his faith shaped both his private life and his policy. He prayed, he patronized scholars, and he set out to strengthen the practice and prestige of Islam within his realm. Yet he ruled a diverse empire, and like wise rulers before and after him, he balanced his personal devotion against the customs of his many peoples. His faith would give his reign its defining act. For every able Muslim who can manage the journey, a pilgrimage to Mecca, the hajj, is a sacred duty. Musa resolved to fulfill it, and determined that his pilgrimage would honor God while announcing, to all the lands between Mali and Arabia, the glory of his empire. Chapter 9. A pilgrimage like no other. Preparing such a journey was itself an undertaking of years. The road to Mecca ran for thousands of kilometers across some of the harshest terrain on earth, and Musa intended to travel it not in secret but in splendor, with a household, a court, soldiers, servants, and provisions for a journey there, and back that would take the better part of 2 years. Above all, he would carry gold, to spend, to give in charity, and to display the standing of Mali. He appointed his affairs to be governed in his absence, and, in 1324, set his face towards the east. The decision was bold to the point of audacity. To leave an empire for so long was a risk. To cross the desert was a danger. To arrive in the great cities of the Islamic world, as an equal of their rulers, was an ambition few would have dared. Musa dared it, and the world would remember. Chapter 10. The caravan sets out. The scale of Musa's caravan became the stuff of legend, and we should treat the legend with care. The Arab chroniclers who recorded it, writing from second-hand reports, sometimes decades later, spoke of tens of thousands of people, long trains of camels, and hundreds of servants, each bearing a heavy staff of gold. One account gives 60,000 in his train, another 12,000 servants alone. Numbers like these were almost certainly magnified in the retelling, as remarkable things tend to be. But behind the exaggeration lies a real and astonishing fact. Every source agrees that nothing like Musa's procession had been seen on those roads before. Whatever its true size, it was vast, disciplined, and dazzling. A moving city of the faithful, glittering with gold, advancing day after day toward the rising sun. Chapter 11. Into the Great Desert. Between Mali and Egypt lay the Sahara, the largest hot desert on earth, and there was no way east that did not test the travelers to their limits. The caravan moved from well to well and from oasis to oasis, resting through the worst of the heat and pressing on across plains of sand and stone. Desert towns such as Walata, on the empire's northern edge, served as gateways where water and provisions could be gathered for the next stage. Progress was measured in weeks and months, not days. Heat, thirst, distance, and the ever-present risk of losing the way all had to be mastered. And a company so large brought its own difficulties of food, order, and pace. Yet the same trade routes that carried Mali's gold had carried travelers for centuries, and Musa's people knew them. Step by step, the great procession crossed the desert that had made their empire rich. Chapter 12. Cairo 1324. In July 1324, the caravan reached Cairo, then one of the greatest cities on earth and the jewel of the Mamluk realm. Musa and his company first made camp near the pyramids at Giza, that ancient wonder already thousands of years old, before entering the city itself. Cairo was no stranger to wealth or to important visitors. It was a capital of learning, commerce, and power, accustomed to the comings and goings of the mighty. And yet the arrival of the Emperor of Mali made an impression that the city did not forget. Here was a ruler from a land most Carians had only heard of, arriving with a host out of legend and gold beyond reckoning. Much of what later writers recorded of Musa comes from people in Cairo who saw his visit, which is why this single summer left so deep a mark on history. Chapter 13. Bowing Only to God. The most famous story of Musa's time in Egypt concerns a matter of pride and faith. Custom required that a visitor brought before the Mamluk Sultan, al-Nasir Muhammad, should kneel and kiss the ground in submission. Musa, himself a sovereign who bowed to no earthly king, is said to have hesitated, reluctant to perform the gesture. The account, recorded by the Egyptian official al-Umari from those who remembered the visit, tells that Musa resolved the difficulty with grace. He prostrated himself, but declared that he did so for God, the Lord of all, and not for any man. The two rulers then met with mutual respect, exchanging gifts and courtesies. The story may have grown smoother in the retelling, but it captures what the sources agree upon, that Musa carried himself not as a curiosity from a far country, but as the equal of the greatest rulers of his age. Chapter 14. The city awash with gold. It was in the markets of Cairo that the legend of Musa's gold was truly made. By every account, he and his people spent and gave away gold on an extraordinary scale, in alms to the poor, in gifts to officials and hosts, in purchases from delighted merchants. So much gold changed hands, wrote al-Umari some years later, that its value in Egypt fell and remained depressed long afterwards. It is a vivid image, a single visitor's generosity, unsettling the economy of one of the world's great cities. Modern historians treat the claim with caution. The effect may have been smaller, or shorter than the chronicler suggests, and such stories tend to swell with each retelling. But whether the gold glut lasted months or years, the deeper truth is plain. The Emperor of Mali had proved beyond any doubt that the tales of his wealth were no mere rumor. Cairo never forgot him. Chapter 15. Mecca. Beyond the splendor and the spending lay the true purpose of the journey. From Cairo the caravan continued across Arabia to Mecca and Medina, the holiest cities of Islam, where Musa completed the rites of the hajj, alongside pilgrims drawn from across the Muslim world. Here the emperor was, for a time, simply one of the faithful fulfilling the duty that had set the whole vast enterprise in motion. He gave generously in the holy cities, as he had everywhere along the way. It is said that he sought out scholars and learned men, and persuaded some to return with him to enrich his empire. The pilgrimage joined Mali, in the most public way imaginable, to the wider community of Islam, and confirmed Musa's standing as a devout and powerful Muslim ruler. The journey east had been a triumph of display. This was its sacred heart. With the duty fulfilled, Musa turned for home. Chapter 16. The Long Road Home. The return journey humbled even the richest of kings. The same desert had to be recrossed, and now the season, sickness, hunger, and the threat of raiders took their toll on the great company. There was a further difficulty, and a telling one. Having given away and spent so prodigiously on the outward journey, Musa is reported to have run short of gold before he reached home, and to have borrowed money in Cairo at a steep rate to see his household back across the desert. The man whose wealth had shaken a city's markets had, for a moment, to live on credit. There is a quiet lesson in it about the difference between a fortune and a flow, between owning gold and commanding the trade that produces it. Diminished but undefeated, and now accompanied by scholars and craftsmen, Musa came home to Mali after nearly 2 years abroad. Chapter 17. Scholars and Builders. Musa returned, determined to leave his empire greater than he had found it, and he invested his prestige in faith and learning. He brought back scholars, jurists, and craftsmen, among them, by tradition, the Andalusian poet and architect Abu Ishaq al-Sahili, and he ordered the building of mosques and royal halls across his lands. Tradition long credited al-Sahili with introducing a new architecture to Mali, but modern scholars are more cautious. The distinctive Sudano-Sahelian manner, smooth earthen walls studded with projecting wooden beams and crowned by tapering towers, was rooted in the region's own traditions, the work of local masters as much as any foreign hand. Whoever shaped them, the great earthen mosques that rose in this age became some of the most striking buildings in Africa. Under Musa, Mali did not merely grow richer, it grew more learned, more devout, and more beautiful. Chapter 18. Timbuktu, City of Books. No place better captures the legacy of Musa's age than Timbuktu. He did not found the city. It was already a trading post on the desert's edge. But under his rule, and those who followed, it flourished as never before. Its position made it a meeting point of the desert and the river, of salt and gold, of merchants and pilgrims. Mosques rose within it, including the great Jingareber, and around its houses of worship grew a tradition of scholarship that would make the city famous far beyond Africa. In time, Timbuktu's scholars studied law, theology, astronomy, mathematics, and medicine. Its markets traded in books as eagerly as in goods, and its libraries gathered tens of thousands of manuscripts, many of which survive today. The very name Timbuktu entered distant languages as a byword for the most remote and fabulous place imaginable. That it became so is, in no small part, the legacy of the emperor who put Mali on the map. Chapter 19. The King on the Map. About 50 years after the Great Pilgrimage, a mapmaker on the Mediterranean island of Majorca sat down to draw the known world. The result, the Catalan Atlas of 1375, is one of the masterpieces of medieval mapmaking. And there, in the heart of West Africa, sits a crowned black king on a golden throne, a scepter in one hand, and a great nugget of gold held up in the other. A caption names him as the Lord of the Gold-Bearing Land, the richest and noblest of all the kings of that region. This was how Europe, which had never seen him, chose to picture the emperor of Mali by his gold. The image fixed Musa's fame for centuries, and shaped how the wider world remembered him. It is worth recalling that this was Europe's imagining, drawn from rumor and trade talk. But it tells us how brightly, and how far, the name of Mansa Musa had traveled. Chapter 20. What we really know. So what, in the end, do we really know? Less than the legend would like, and more than enough to matter. Much of Musa's story reaches us secondhand through Arab writers like al-Umari, and Ibn Khaldun, who recorded it after the fact, and through the later traveler Ibn Battuta, who visited Mali in the years after Musa's death. Even his dates are uncertain, and the dazzling numbers, the 60,000 attendants. The collapse of Cairo's gold are best read as legend lightly grounded in fact. The title of richest person in history is a modern invention, impossible to verify and beside the point. The solid heart of the story needs no exaggeration. A devout and capable emperor of a vast, wealthy and sophisticated West African state, whose pilgrimage in 1324 astonished the medieval world. Mansa Musa matters not because of a number, but because he reminds us how rich and consequential the African past truly was. A note on history and sources. This book tells a true story and is careful to mark where fact ends and legend begins. Mansa Musa's life is documented, mainly by the Arabic writers al-Umari and Ibn Khaldun, and by the traveler Ibn Battuta, with later West African chronicles and the European Catalan Atlas. These sources disagree on numbers and dates, and the most spectacular details are uncertain or modern. The illustrations are artistic interpretations created with the assistance of artificial intelligence, not photographs or historical portraits. About Griot. Griot tells the true stories of African and Black history with the care they deserve, researched, sourced, and beautifully illustrated. Copyright 2026, published independently via Griot. E. T. Ta.